Hey guys,
Oh, hey Mitch, welcome.
thanks. Sorry, running a bit late. We just got to the hotel, so just got checked in, figured out Wi-Fi, etc.
Sam, did you want to start your market update?
Sure. Okay, so we will jump into the number of active listings. And again, this is just single family residential properties. We're not talking about multifamilies. So our total number of active listings in the Des Moines area MLS is 3,956. Which is about 1,000 less active listings than what we had at this time last year. Quite a significant decrease.
Massive. That's a huge drop. I know we've been seeing a lot of that posting around throughout the world saying, hey guys, inventory is really low. And we're seeing a very high demand across the board as a result of that.
Absolutely. I also saw a post calling kind of all investors and house flippers, like they're so needed right now for those for kind of first time home buyer price points, you know, anything under that 180-ish range. I know I have quite a few buyers right now that are just begging for properties that are
has become a very important part of social media strategy, and it's a great.
I don't know what that overlay was. Sorry about that.
Yes, okay. So total number of new listings for the month of December, we had 958 new listings come on the market, which is about 100 more than this time last year. So that's kind of interesting. We had 858 new listings in the month of December in 2019.
That is interesting. It kind of shows the the reminiscent, hey, we're low on inventory, let's get something out there. So all these homeowners that are on the edge or all this product that's coming, kind of pushing that direction.
For sure. Another interesting tidbit is the total number of sales that occurred in December 2020 as 1,474 properties were sold residentially, which is an increase from this time last year, whereas 1,101. So again, what we continue to keep saying is people are buying and inventory is low, but if it's there, they will come.
That's interesting. What's our average looking like dollars per square foot?
Let's take a peek. I have our average sales price is $252,000. Let me jump in here real quick and get that figure for us.
Sorry, that was a bad question based on the data we have.
That's okay. Figure it out real quick. So list price, square foot ratio. We're looking at about in between, probably like $160 per square foot is the average for December 2020. Let me pop into 2019 to compare it. Our average price per square foot at the same time last year, we were about $150 a square foot. So about a $10 to $15 increase on our price per square foot.
And something to keep in mind with that, guys, that's the whole area. So that's largely drugged down by some of those very far suburbias. So the Newtons and the Madrids and all of those type of pieces. And then it's also bolstered significantly by the Waukees and the West Des Moines and kind of averaged out inside of the Des Moines proper area. So that's you know, take it with a grain of salt from an average. The trend that we care about, though, is that upwardness. So we're seeing a $10 jump across all of that market data per square foot from year over year.
Which is awesome for our folks that like to fix and flip. So our average days to sell, we're still looking really great. For December of 2020, we were looking at 44 days average from start to finish once that property gets under contract until it officially arrives safely at the closing table. In the year 2019, we were looking at 62 days. So no worries on a global pandemic getting those appraisals done in a timely manner, although we are all feeling that crunch.
Yeah, that's interesting. And inside of that appraisal piece, I don't know what you've seen, Sam, but a lot of what we're seeing come through are not interior appraisers anymore. So if it's an occupied property, they're saying skip it, and they're just doing an exterior drive-by and verifying off of photos, which is really interesting.
It is interesting. I have noticed a massive uptick in appraisers calling, gathering more information on listings that agents have sold. So if you were the listing agent on a property, they're giving you a jingle to see, hey, fill me in on the ins and outs of what that property was. And I always like to talk to them. They're good folks to have on your side.
We can't influence appraisers, but relationships sure don't hurt that.
Absolutely.
That's funny.
So like I mentioned, average price points for properties that were sold, we're looking at $252,065. So pretty similar all the way across from about July of 2020. We've kind of stayed within that same price point, which is still a pretty significant increase from 2019. We're looking at, the 230s was the average in 2019. So
and we saw that trend kind of scale upwards all year long. That gap just kept getting wider, which is really weird. Like in general, to me, with as much negative publicity as is out there about economy and everything else, to see that trend continually go up in our area. But I think Humphrey asked last month what that looks like across the nation, and I didn't pull data. I'll be honest on that. I don't know. Did you happen to, Jen or Sam?
No, I do not have any, I do not have any of that
I
data.
know I talked to a couple friends in Wisconsin as well as Cali, Colorado and Texas, and they're all seeing massive increases as well in their market areas. They're talking double-digit or double percentage increases year over year still. So it would be at least similar to what we're seeing. I don't see any softening. It's really just that inventory continually compresses. So
from folks that I've chatted with, I have quite a few friends that are agents in the Quad Cities, and they are seeing a similar uptick in average days on market. A downtick on average days on market, uptick on average price points of houses that have sold. And then they're also seeing record low inventory, which is, it's great if you're a seller. If you're a buyer, you just have to be really aggressive and have an agent that is able to get really creative with your offers.
It's interesting. How are the buyers feeling, Sam? Are you working with anyone right now that's like, yeesh?
Yeah. Like I said, my buyers are feeling the crunch. They're like, we want to buy right now because interest rates are low, but Sam, there's like 7 houses available that are in our price point or, in the area that we want to be in. It seems like almost daily I'm having these conversations of, should we expand our search? Are you comfortable if we start to inch closer to the spot that you said, like, I really don't want to be there? And yes, the answer to that is yes. I'm finding myself continuously adjusting our search criteria and reaching out to the off-market folks or the investors that I know, like, hey, what are you working on? What's coming? What are you almost done with? Can we get in to look at it before you complete it? Again, that's where those strong relationships are a benefit.
For sure. I know we dropped 3 houses at the end of December and they were gone instantly. We had 6-8 showings on them and just gone, which is good. I mean, that's good news, but they never hit market. So we don't know what top of dollar could have been. But just that pent up demand, like you're talking about, is critical as a seller who has those pieces, and then is very frustrating as a buyer who doesn't and is looking for it.
Yes.
Very cool. Awesome. Anything else to add, Sam?
No, that's everything I have for our January market update.
Awesome. Thank you for helping with that.
For sure.
One real quick thing, Sam, did you want to talk about what we previewed in December and is now fully live?
Oh, yeah. So some really awesome news. I kind of mentioned that I was in the works of opening my own brokerage, and now that is official. So Hartley's Realty Group is officially up and running. It's been great. I love the feedback that I'm getting from agents that I've worked with in the past and folks that are reaching out like, holy cow, this is so awesome. And it kind of falls back on being able to build those relationships by having that boutique type of brokerage. There's just a little more flexibility, still within the rules and laws, but a little more flexibility than the big box brokerages.
Yeah, and now you get to make your own decisions. So to echo that. That's why we always did the independent route. We never liked it through the corporate franchise structure and those feels, because it really keeps you nimble. So congratulations on that, Sam. That's awesome.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, we've got Jane here tonight. Jane's joining us. She's a professor and she's studying something that's very relevant for us. So Jane, I want to give you the opportunity to introduce yourself so I don't butcher everything, and also tell us about the study you're working on and how that is impactful for kind of the investing audience.
Sure. So hello, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. My name is Jane Rongerude, and I am an associate professor of community and regional planning at Iowa State. And my background is in housing research. And back in the day, I got my degree at Berkeley, and I looked at the redevelopment of public housing in San Francisco. And in San Francisco, that was interesting because I don't have to tell you about the land values in San Francisco. And the public housing communities there were actually, you think of San Francisco and you think elite, you think wealth, but the public housing communities there were actually some of the most severely distressed in the country. I think people often think of Chicago because it's so famous what's happened there with public housing. But in San Francisco, you had raw sewage running down the street. You had, old wiring that caused apartment fires that killed a grandmother and her 5 grandchildren.
Wow.
So really, really severe distress and low density. So the public housing units the public housing communities were at far lower densities than the rest of the city. And so some of the leadership in the city had this idea. You also have a liberal progressive political climate there that made some of this possible there as well. But they said, hey, what happens if we leverage these land values and we triple the density And will that allow us to not only redevelop the public housing unit replacing every single unit, but to add a level of tax credit, right? So still subsidized, but not so deeply subsidized, and then add a layer of market rate. And there they weren't talking about luxury market rate, which is often what happens when public housing communities are redeveloped. They were talking about a price point that at the time, now this was 10 years ago, so it would be, anyway, it was about $300,000, $350,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment. And that was a price point that just simply didn't exist in the city.
That's
right?
interesting.
Yeah. So when I moved about a year
just
after,
so we can get our Iowa minds around that. So
right?
$350,000 for a 2-bedroom, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
What was a luxury version of that 2-bedroom?
Well, the median household price, the median sale price around 2012, let's say, is when it went past $1 million in San Francisco.
Wow. Okay.
So it was
There's
really, it was just impossible for families to buy units. It was for most folks. So that was what I studied in San Francisco and in the Bay Area. I moved here, and I moved to what was the largest metro in the country to have never built family public housing. So the good people of Des Moines made the choice in the 60s not to build public housing. And so I was very curious, what are people doing? How are people making do on the market? And so I spent some time researching that. And what I learned, this was with some funding from the Polk County Housing Trust Fund. What I learned is while low-income people are mobile everywhere, they're hypermobile in Des Moines. And part of that is because of the conditions of the units that they're living in. And so
what does that mean?
That means that people were living. So some of the stories that people would say were like, they would tell us stories about living in units where every time they turned on the oven, cockroaches would come running out, right? Gotcha. Or they would talk. So the physical conditions of the units were really substandard. And so, which is different than the Bay Area, right? There's a huge affordability crisis in the Bay Area, but the units are generally at higher conditions because there's been a lot more pressure on that market. Now, not that people weren't putting up plywood in their garage and trying to rent that as a unit for, $3,000.
You always have those outliers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And here it's a little bit different. Like the prices are lower, rents are lower, incomes are lower, but the quality of the housing on that lower end of the market is there's a lot of work to be done there.
Genuinely substandard from the sounds of it.
Yes, absolutely. And so that was interesting and important work. But as we started moving into, do you like how I say that about my own work? It was important work. I just cracked myself up. And so then when COVID happened, as a housing researcher and someone who's, looked at affordability and been concerned with affordability, of course, I saw what many people saw, which was a potential for an eviction crisis. Which, initially the bump on unemployment, I think, helped quite a bit there. But what I often say is that while I'm one of 3 fans of public housing in the country, I look at examples like Singapore, where 85% of the population lives in public housing. And I think that accomplishes some things, but it's not our system. Right? That's not the system that we have. The system that we have is based on the market, and it requires residential rental property owners to buy and rent properties. And it's been interesting to me that so much of the research right now and the concern about rental housing stability is being focused on tenants and eviction, when really, right, the people that we need to understand the conditions that they're struggling with right now, from my perspective, and I'm speaking as a planner, where we look at institutions, right, we need to know what the property owners, what are their struggles and what are the challenges that they're facing. And as I started moving into this research area, what I learned is that you all are a mystery. You're a mystery. You're this mysterious group. We actually know nothing about you.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is mind-blowing to me. It is absolutely mind-blowing to me because so essential, right? Residential rental property owners, absolutely essential in our system. Huge segments of the population wouldn't be housed without those folks providing housing. But yet we don't know basic things. We don't know, we don't even know how to categorize property owners because we've done such little research. So our study is interested in housing stability in COVID and specifically property owner decision making. But we also have this larger agenda of doing some foundational research around just the categories. How do we make sense of this group of people that provide this really critical service?
That's really interesting because I know inside of our own grouping, inside of our own, like we're all active investors. There's a Facebook group watching as well as the folks inside of this section here, but we're all different types of investors. And it's difficult because I'm a different kind of investor, substantially different than a wholesaler. And I'm substantially different than someone that has owned 1 or 2 properties. And I'm substantially different than someone who hasn't done any rehab work before. That's not saying that I'm better or I'm worse. It's just saying that I'm different. And from your standpoint, you don't have, we're trying to figure out, right, the base vocab to even what to call us and who we're studying. Because everyone wants to raise their hand and say, I'm an investor, but what does that really mean?
Yep.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly the question. And what I've been finding is I've been having conversations across the country with folks, and we all do the same thing, which is there's the mom and pop property owners, and there's the corporate investors, and then we do this, right, to talk about the middle, because we don't actually know who they are. We know that there is a survey that the census does every 3 years, the rental financial. I'm gonna have to look up the name really quickly here, but I left as soon as I started saying it. At the Housing Financial Survey, and they're focused on buildings. Right, yep. They're focused on properties. And so what we know from that survey is that the majority of properties are small units. So that would be fewer than 5, but the majority of housing is in buildings with more than 50 units. So that's interesting, right? So we know that there's kind of that split, and those are some of the questions that we ask on our survey. So I don't know how many folks have received an email from us asking you to please click on that link, even though we've all been so well trained not to click on a link that comes in an email from a stranger. Some of you might have even sent me those emails saying, "Are you really Jane Rongerude? Are you really conducting a survey?" And I say, yes, please, we need you.
That's really funny.
But we do ask some demographic information, and we do also ask some questions about portfolios, because our study is focused, our unit of analysis is the property owner. Yep. Right? So we're looking at, because we want to understand who these people are. Because in disasters, we need to reach out to them. We need to figure out what's going on and what they need. And because there's just, whether you want to think about planning or you want to think about regulation, or you just want to think about interesting research, we need to figure out you mysterious people. We need to know more about you.
So how do we help with that? As the first question, how do we as investors help define that and also help your research?
Thank you. Well, so this study, it's of course very important. We've gone through the whole process in the university to protect human subjects, and human subjects are anybody who participates, any person who participates in our study. So everything is confidential. And in order to make sure that our data stays confidential and isn't connected to people's names unless they choose to give us their name, is
you can
that
have mine, Jane. I don't mind what my name's on.
Well, we can't post a link on Facebook, so I can't give you a link because those are notorious for being hacked. We're working with the Center for Statistical Methods at Iowa State. They're the people who've been administering the survey for us, and we were like, please, can't we post it on Facebook, please? And they said, no, people hack those. It doesn't work. So if you want to participate and you have not received, if you've received the email and you've got the link, please click on it. I promise nothing bad's going to happen. You'll go to our survey. It shouldn't take you more than 10 minutes. We worked really, really hard on that because I experience survey rage. Right? If a survey gets past 10 minutes, I'm furious. I'm no longer answering the questions. I'm just typing in, who's your supervisor? Why is the survey taking so long? My apologies if any of you get past 10 minutes. It's because you have a very complex portfolio and we did the best we could to keep it short. But yeah, so if you received the email, please fill it out. We have right now about 13.4% response rate from Des Moines. Our studies in 4 cities, Des Moines, which is that's being funded in part by the Polk County Housing Trust Fund, and then Cleveland, Minneapolis, and Tampa. Those are being funded by the National Science Foundation. And we are right neck and neck with Minneapolis, and I think we can beat them. I think we can do better with our response rate. So come on, help us out. Help the home team.
We're going to help you. We're going to get a better response rate down here.
Thank you. And so if you didn't receive it, then please just send me an email and I'll add you to our list and we'll send it out to you. My email is jrong@iastate.edu. And I've added, we'll pass that along. You're welcome to post that as long as you send me nice emails. I tell you what I've learned, the property owners in Tampa tended to ignore us, and it was the property owners in Cleveland that cussed us out.
I think that's something about the Iowa nice thing. You shouldn't get too much hate mail.
No, we didn't. We just questions about if we were who we said we were. Yeah, so that would be fantastic to have your participation. We do ask some questions about how you finance your investment. We ask the zip codes where the majority of your holdings are. We ask for a median price across your portfolio. And then we ask some questions about effects. So do you have more vacancies than you did pre-COVID? Are you having a harder time filling units? Have you had to make rent adjustments, deals with tenants? Do you have more evictions? Have you been able to find assistance? Questions like that. So we're trying to understand the COVID impacts in there as well.
That makes sense. So I think I understand what the study is. Mm-hmm. So what you're hoping to learn, the questions themselves are kind of leaders, right? So I assume there's a hypothesis that you have behind this, and you're trying to lead to find the auxiliary data that we're not expecting. Has there been anything that's come up so far that you're like, oh man, that's interesting, or I hadn't considered that when we went into this?
So we're just pulling in our data, and I love our team. We have Dan Coleman, who's part of the Masters in Real Estate Development, the new program at Iowa State. So he's in planning and in finance. We have Bishwa Das, who's in planning and also in extension. He does a lot of local government work. And then we have Lily Wang from statistics, who's just a powerhouse. Like I could go on and on about what she's done. And I always tease her, like, as far as I'm concerned, what she does is magic, right? So she's done a lot of COVID modeling, actually, as well as work with the SEC. So we have a really exciting high-powered team, and we are trying to understand, are there relationships between characteristics about landlords and our property owners, residential rental property owners? I'm sorry, it's just fewer syllables when I say landlord. So I know the phrase itself is a little bit out of fashion, but it's so long to say the other. So I hope I ask for your forgiveness on that.
I think most of us self-identify as landlords.
Okay, all right,
so
okay,
good. Yeah.
All right, good. I'm among friends then. And so, who is more likely to be experiencing what we're broadly calling stress right now, right? So less able to fill units. We're asking people if they're less satisfied as property owners, right? Are you looking to get out of the business now? Is this just too much risk, too much trouble? We're getting some really nice stories from people about their personal experiences in either like things are fine, but they're fine. Like I have a small margin, and as soon as someone stops paying rent, it's going to be over for me. I don't have So we want to know, like, does it make a difference how capitalized people are? Does it make a difference if they have mortgages? Are small holders better off than people who own more units? I mean, it's not surprising that our very like fast and dirty first analysis is that people whose average rent is lower are experiencing more troubles right
That makes
now.
sense.
People who have more units are experiencing more troubles right now. I do want to share with you, there's a couple of ways we're making this available to people, this data and our findings. So I do have to be perfectly honest, we're researchers, right? And we're planners, and we very much care about change on the ground and policy, but I can't promise you that anybody's going to care what we say. Right. I can't tell you that. We're trying really hard. This is a question we talk about every week, the communication side of this, and how can we start to shape this discourse really, and put this focus on what's happening with the landlords, because we aren't going to solve this problem if we stay focused on tenants. We need to have a more complicated view of the picture, a more complex view of the picture. So we're creating a data dashboard. And we're going to actually, our plan is to open that up at the 1st of February. And so you're going to have as we find things, we're going to post them there. And you'll be able to look at it and see, do folks who have some of this, what I've talked about, do folks with fewer units, are they having fewer evictions than folks who have more units? Right? We're doing all of those kinds of comparisons. You'll be able to look across the 4 cities and see how is the experience of folks who own property here in Des Moines, similar or different than Minneapolis, or similar and different than Tampa. So I'm super excited about that, because I think that you all are going to know what to do with some of these data also, right? And you might be able to move things a little bit faster than we can as researchers. And we also want to hear back from you. Like, are there questions that we're missing? And I can't promise you that we can take them up, but this is just the first round of the study. And so we really need your expertise as the people on the ground who can say, like, why didn't you think about this? We've already gotten great feedback from people. Like, I promise you, because maybe even one of you all, I've gotten the emails, why didn't you pilot this study? And I was like, we did. I promise. We spent lots of time talking to lots of people as we developed this survey, but the ideas sometimes come up when they come up.
It's always a process for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then from the data dashboard, there'll be white papers. So the next focus being on speaking to decision makers and speaking to policymakers. I will tell you one unexpected early finding to answer that question was the importance of rental registries. And I don't know how you all feel about that. And I don't know, like, from your perspective, if they're helpful or they're not, but
they very much are.
Yeah, you can't, I mean, how can the city even connect with you? How can they even find, like, if, let's say there's a program for assistance, given how mysterious you are as a group of people, if there isn't a name, right, and an email address connected to a unit, then what can the city do? Right?
That's a really interesting point. So that rental registry in Des Moines makes it very easy for us to find problem landlords. So if I have a property, I've got one right now, actually, where the rental next door, they just keep throwing garbage over the fence, like every week. And there's not a whole lot of mechanisms for that, but at least I know who that landlord is, and I can go knock on that landlord's door and actually bring that problem to him to try to address, rather than just getting it kicked off to me. Now you compare that to some of the other cities that we operated in around Chicago, where there is absolutely no rental permit, no registration, and your best bet is public record and then a seed of anonymity, all the way down to, oh, we got a registered agent that's an attorney. Great. Well, this is a dead end. So to that point, that rental registry, that is a huge gap right now. And then trying to transitioning that to some of the other folks in the group, having that rental registry also allows you to track down potentially distressed properties to the last known contact for those. So there's a lot of opportunity inside of there for the betterment of communities through those public data elements, if you will.
Well, and something to think about with this, because I have, in the process of our survey and reaching out, I have people contact me now, and they say, no one else is studying landlords. And I say, I know. This is crazy. And so what's happening is, and you might have read about some of these stories as well, right? Folks are looking at how to crowdsource information about landlords. And
Yep.
so this problem will be solved. And cities can do it, and it can be part of, you know, that public record and part of making regulation happen well, or it can be in individual private hands. And you know, is that good? Is that bad? I don't know, but it's certainly a different kind of system, and it's going to provide different kinds of access to different kinds of people.
Right.
The Minneapolis, they have all open records. They're the gold standard in terms of how to put out a registry like this. It's very nice. It's very public. You know, you get all that information. So I am a fan. I think it's important.
Jess and I happen to be in Minneapolis right now, so I'm going to go like take some emails from people so they don't get submitted, so we can keep winning. That's funny. Any other like early findings that you're like, oh man, that was unexpected? Even if they're not findings necessarily, but just like interesting tidbits from one-off landlords.
Well, this is on the side of the foundational data, so learning about the characteristics of landlords. But I was surprised that we do ask people about their income. You know, we have categories, and we ask you, you know, what's your annual income, and I was surprised that we don't have any respondents who are at this point who are under the area median income in Des Moines. So in other cities, right, there has been a move. Well, I'll just use San Francisco, right? Because I moved here from San Francisco. The building I lived in San Francisco had been purchased by a Chinese immigrant family in the 70s. And he was a cab driver, right? And so it's that, like in San Francisco, you have the garage and then 2 flats above it. And so the family lives in one flat and they rent out the other flat, and that covered their rent. So an immigrant, it's crazy to think that an immigrant cab driver's family could own a building in San Francisco, right? And they paid $30,000 for it, and it was worth $2 million by the time I was living in it. But so that's can be, for those of us who are housing advocates and researchers, right? That model of helping lower income people, working people who have a property, and if they have a unit there, it can help them be stable and have affordable housing, and someone else, right?
That's interesting. So what you're saying is there's no one in Des Moines that's responded to date that owns a rental property who is below median income.
Yep, no one.
Interesting.
So I don't know what that means, and I haven't looked at those numbers with the other cities, but that was surprising, and that tells me. And when we look at the data, we ask people to identify their careers, right? So we ask people to, it's again in categories, but the majority, more than half of the respondents identified being executives or managers, architects, having professional jobs. And so we do see that at least the survey is focused on folks who self-manage their properties. And so at least among that group of people, we are seeing that people are more affluent than I might have expected as a whole, right?
So is it fair to extrapolate that these are folks that are making these as investment alternatives to some of the more traditional methodologies?
I think that would be a question that would be a hypothesis for sure. Yeah, that we're seeing more, and we don't have the large corporate investors here in Des Moines. So that could be part of that, right? Without the large external investors.
I can tell you those are coming. So we've seen that trickling here. There are some larger corporations buying now, but again, they do so in anonymity. They're not advertising, hey, we're big corporate players. They break it down into several very small LLC transactions, and then they just plead. They stay under the radar as much as possible, because there is that weird association. People want to do business with people, right? And that translates both into landlords, tenants, and even the professional mechanisms. I get a corporate guy that calls me up wanting to buy property. I'm like, cool, call someone else. Like, that's great. Probably not.
Well, I think that there's a policy issue here as well. That's a communications issue. And I have to say, like, communications, it's not my thing. And sometimes I find it a little distasteful, but I recognize that it's important. This is why I'm an academic, because I can just say things. I don't have to worry about how everyone takes them, right? many people find the idea of providing assistance to landlords distasteful, right?
Absolutely.
Like the first image that comes to their mind is like, these are people who are living off the blood of the poor, trying to get rich and off the poor, and right. And this has again been part of the national conversation, recognition that we need those stories, the stories of the people who are trying to provide housing, who've been helpful to tenants. Like this is part of why we need to understand the reality. These characteristics are actually important, because we need to be able to tell the actual story of who, and not that there aren't people who are exploitive, because there isn't anything that you do, of course. But I don't think that that's the majority. And there's certainly stories of people, and you all may have some of those stories yourself. And so if you do, I hope you share them, because it's important to hear that. And if you're not having struggles, we need to hear that too. That's what I had a lot of people write to me and say, everything's fine. I don't want to fill out your survey. And I said, please.
Yeah, we need good data too, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting because it's always the loud sides. It's never the middle. That I'm just doing all right. I don't want to ask for help. You never get that feedback. You get the people that are struggling, the people that are crushing it.
Yep.
Like, that middle grouping.
Mm-hmm.
Eric, do you mind talking a little bit, brother? Do you mind sharing with Jane just briefly how your stuff's going?
This Eric?
Yes, sir. I see you on here. I figured, why not?
Mitch, I'd do anything for you. Whatever you want, I'll do. No problem, brother.
The power.
Well, I'm just sitting here thinking about incentives. I love what you were just saying, Jane, about, sort of supporting that there's distaste in supporting landlords. And I'm a big fan of like understanding incentives and motivations. But it's very interesting to hear, like you've got opportunity zones that are sort of basically urban renewal action, which I think pulls stuff that was affordable into unaffordable in some cases in some cities. And then, you've got big corporations that can get tax credits and trade tax credits for affordable housing, all kinds of incentives. But the group you're talking about doesn't have incentives. So I'd love to hear and I'm not answering Mitch's question. I'm like hijacking the stage. But I'd love to hear your thoughts and sort of hypothesis on incentives that work for the small to medium-sized investors that are providing that affordable housing. Just as a side note, and what was your question, Mitch? Sorry, bud.
I was curious how your project's going. So I know because we've done business that you have apartments and you service, at least when we handed off, a lot of that lower income demographic. I was curious what your experience has been. Eric, I will touch on the question that you asked. I have some thoughts on that, as well as a follow-up and someone that can specifically, who is currently writing incentives around that, talk about it. I will put everyone in touch with that as well.
Cool. Yeah, it's going great, Mitch. The property that I have that mostly services low income, hardworking people, was well managed before I got it, so it was very easy to sort of step into and work through. But it's going very well. I think there's definitely struggles, but I think people are adapting and doing a great job. It's been interesting, like even just the challenge of doing kids not going to school and being in the property 24/7 has been like a maintenance challenge. It's been a sanity challenge for the community in general. But I think it's going well, and I see people being very adaptive and doing great. So
your biggest issue right now is the kiddos out of school. Is that fair? Okay.
Yeah.
That's
There's
interesting.
a lot of new coloring on the walls. I'll just put it that way. There's a lot of bored kids all over the place.
Oh, that's
great kids, and it's going well. But I think everyone, there's been a shock, with people's work, with school, stress on relationships, which I've got people divorcing that I never would have thought were divorcing, and so just lots of struggles with the community. But in general, I think going well overall. Yeah. I'm sorry you called on me now.
Like I said, we need those stories, and we need we need some examples, from people of what that, you said it's about being adaptable. And so what does that look like? What does that involve? I mean, sometimes it means payment plans for rent, but sometimes, and some people have reported waiving late fees, for example, as one way. People have reported deciding not to raise rent when they might have under different conditions. And so all of these are the types of examples. I think they're important. And we need to hear them from people.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exciting stuff you're doing too, by the way, Jane. I'm excited about hearing what you learned.
Thank
Eric,
you.
the question that you had proposed there, I don't know, Jane, if you have any resources inside of that, or if you've seen any incentives being offered from the research you're doing to help those landlords out as of yet.
We haven't, and there's, things have been so focused on the tenants, and so this is part of what we're looking into as well. I think there's, well, again, the experience with the unemployment bump told us how important income is, right? That makes a difference. When people have the money to pay their rent, they pay their rent. And we also are hearing stories of people who could pay rent, not paying rent. And I should, again, we're not speaking to tenants, we're speaking to the landlords. And so they're telling us these stories. I don't know if the tenants would tell different stories, but, in the face of instability, I have to say it, that's a rational decision, right? Like, I don't know what's going to happen. I know I'm going to have to pay this money, but I'm just going to keep it here for now. And we're having people tell us they're not making repairs because they themselves are worried. We have people telling us they're very worried about their property tax bills. And obviously, there's a potential for a future foreclosure crisis that we could see in front of us as well. I will say that part of why it's challenging to throw out kind of any early findings or generalizations is because every time we have an assumption, like, oh, there's not going to be anybody that manages their own properties who has more than 50 units or has more than 100 units. And then we find out, oh, yep, they're out there, and so, nobody's using the paycheck protection program. And then sure enough, they are, right? So just because we're in this great unknown, like you're doing all kinds of things, right? Like, you're resourceful and entrepreneurial people. And so not only do we not know who you are, we don't really know how you think. And so that is an important part of this research and something I'm excited to come back and report to you all. So you can tell me, like, yeah, Jane, you've got this, you understand us, or wow, you missed this piece over here. So we do really need partnership with folks like yourselves to do this research well.
That's awesome. So I know there's some stuff coming through the pipeline, regardless of your opinion on the political components. It doesn't matter. It's neither here nor there. One thing that is coming through the pipeline is a new emergency rental assistance program. So it's currently being written, and there is landlord write-in for this, I'm being told. So I just shared inside of our Facebook group, Jeff Watson is leading the charge on a lot of that. He's a brother of mine, inside of one of the mastermind groups that we work in, and he'll be doing a webinar on that Tuesday, the 26th at 8 p.m. Eastern time to talk about a lot of those underlying, at least initial write-ins, what they're asking for. That doesn't mean that's going to be what's approved, but he's got some insight into what's going into those bills and those assistance programs from the landlord specific perspective to help anyone that has, sitting thousands and thousands of dollars behind in rents, to help you get caught up, to help with those tax payments that everyone's dreading, Jane, to help with those insurance premiums that have hiked up over the last year, especially in Iowa, et cetera. So there is some talk of that and some relief coming for that. But outside of the overarching federal programming, I don't know what else exists for landlords presently.
Yeah, not much, not much. And I think that, there might be, of course, when we think about what is it that local government can do, right? That's when we think about property taxes. And, those might be conversations that need to happen. I can't say we will be speaking to, what the group that we're calling housing stakeholders. So folks like yourselves, also decision makers, planners. And so we'll learn what they're thinking and seeing as their options. But I think it's worthwhile for you all to consider, like, what is it that local government can do for us? and how can local government and the powers of local government, help this progress more smoothly, because we have to adapt now, and then we have to think about recovery also, right? We have both of those things, and we don't even know at this point. It was really interesting actually hearing your market analysis, because we're not even sure yet if this is going to be a supply crisis or a demand crisis, right? We don't really know, because there are definitely stories of people doubling up, right? People leaving the market. I'm seeing in my neighborhood for rent signs that have been around for a long time that weren't here before. Always got filled, had been recently getting filled very quickly. So we don't know. And so we'll be learning that too.
There's what I call fair weather investors right now, Jane.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of folks that have never had to try, because it's just been so easy for the last handful of years. So what I see from that investment side right now is a demand crisis for that grouping of people. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. As well as inside of the lease fill up, I don't have strategies or marketing techniques because the demand's always been there. I haven't really had to compete before. Mm-hmm. So that.
and the interest rates have complicated things, right? Because if the
Absolutely.
Interest rates hadn't been so low, so that people were buying, because we're seeing housing price, sales go on and on and on, which is kind of surprising given the crisis. But then, it makes sense. People are taking advantage of the low interest rates. So how is that going to affect the rental market? I think it's not entirely clear yet.
That's very interesting. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us, or is there anything else we can do to help you, Jane?
We'll definitely spread the word. Please, if you didn't get the survey, send me an email and help us beat Minneapolis. We can do this.
How far away, quantifiably, do you know?
We're right neck and neck, 13.4%. Yeah, and they have a lot more. The sample's bigger, right? They have more rental units, so it's actually easier for us to move ahead. So I think we get a good chunk of folks in there, and we'll be able to not only will be able to beat Minneapolis, but we'll be able to do better analysis for Des Moines, which is really the important thing. Right now, I think we only have one respondent who identified their average rent price across their portfolio as above $2,000 a month. Of course, that's not a lot of our market here in Des Moines, so it's understandable, but it would be great to get some more folks in that category. So people,
I think there is only one guy in Des Moines who's average.
Well, then thank you for completing your survey.
That's a very rare demographic income.
It is. And certainly one of the questions on the survey is, would you be interested in a follow-up interview? And so if you've got more to say yes and give us your information. Again, we do keep everything confidential, so we're not going to report on any individual's findings, right? We're not going to we actually can't pull out any one person. And there's no personally identifiable information. We even keep, for the people who give us their information so that we can follow up with them, that's in a separate database. So it's like we do everything. We're very careful to protect your confidentiality, because I understand it can be uncomfortable giving this kind of information to a stranger.
Sure.
So I want you to know that we're appreciate your participation, and we'll take your confidentiality very seriously. And then what I'd like to do, Mitch, is I'd like to share the information for the URL for the dashboard once we have it
Absolutely.
up. And then please look at it. Let us know what we got right. Let us know what we got wrong. Let us know what's interesting to you, and keep sending your questions. So like I said, even if we can't answer them and they're not a part of our study, just like you all have networks, of course, academics do too. And as we go around and tell people how important and exciting this study is, I hope that we're going to see an increase in studies in this area. And so,
really cool.
Can share these questions and pass them along and try to get you some answers.
Absolutely. Well, we really appreciate it, Jane. I hope to stay in touch on these things and to, in future iterations, be a part of that, both personally and through the network. So yeah. Thank you very much for taking the time out. Thank you for sharing that dashboard. We'll definitely get that pushed out to the group in a post so everyone benefits. So we're almost up to 800 people in our network on the Facebook group now, all local to Des Moines. So hopefully that pushes out and gets you a handful more responses.
Oh yeah, that's great. Like Minneapolis is gonna be blown out of the water. If we can even get half of y'all to participate, Minneapolis will be in our dust. Let's do this. Yeah.
Perfect. Perfect. If you guys have questions or anything else for Jane, she did post her email there. Obviously, don't bombard her. Don't send her hate mail. Don't do anything like that. But check the dashboard first, and then I'm sure Jane would be happy to keep you guys in the loop.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will say that especially once classes start next week, I'm not always a 24-hour email response person, but I'm getting to as quickly as I can. But if you really have a burning question and you don't hear back from me, don't be shy about sending me a second email. Matter of fact, I would encourage you to use the exclamation point, because I do look at those first, and sometimes that's what it takes.
Are caps acceptable? Caps and exclamation?
No, they're
Okay.
not.
No caps. All right, there we go. There's the line.
You can use the exclamation point to wave your hand, but you don't get to yell at me.
Very good. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks, everyone,
Right,
for
thank
jumping
you.
in. Thank you, Jane, for your time. I hope you all have a blessed and great day.
Yeah. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thanks, Jane.